For nearly 2,000 years, an ancient parchment hidden at the foot of a volcano was deciphered thanks to artificial intelligence. What emerged was not a record of the past, but a warning. What surfaced was not historical knowledge. It carried a caution. Today, in different parts of the world, machines have begun to decode forgotten writings that were thought to be lost forever. But the content of these decoded messages does not carry the nature of peace. They speak of fire, of silence, of collapse, and of far more somber things. From the Indus Valley to the Maya pyramids, from secret women's codes to forgotten prophecies, these languages did not vanish on their own. They were silenced. Now that artificial intelligence is revealing these writings, one question arises: why were they hidden in the first place? Join us. Let's examine the lost scripts and the digital awakening together. Across every corner of the world, there exist ancient writing samples carved, drawn, painted, or incised onto different surfaces, from stone and bone to clay, gold, and even fabric. Yet for centuries, the code of these incisions could not be cracked. These incisions are what researchers call lost scripts, not because they never existed, but because they are deemed lost since we cannot decipher their meanings. But what if these incisions and writings start to speak and be read again? What happens when artificial intelligence, originally developed for facial recognition or ad prediction, begins to unravel the hidden messages of forgotten languages? And what if what comes to light is something we were not meant to learn? If we take the Indus script as an example, it dates back more than 4,500 years, emerged in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. Yet to this day, not a single sign has been definitively deciphered. We lack a bilingual translation guide like the Rosetta Stone. It is as if someone deliberately wrote the ciphers, then destroyed the key, and disappeared. Consider also Rongorongo on Easter Island, an odd mirrored arrangement engraved on wooden tablets, first left to right, then right to left, each line written inverted. Some scholars believe this script was the island's unique sacred writing model. Others think these signs may contain genealogies or warnings. But with the arrival of European colonizers, the extinction of this culture was sealed. Today, there isn't a single person who can understand it. In addition, the Etruscan language used in Italy before the Roman Empire is one of these as well. We have thousands of inscriptions and incisions today, tomb dedications, religious texts, and personal names. We know the sounds of the words, we recognize their syllables and alphabet. But what about their contents? That part largely remains a mystery. For Etruscan was a completely isolated language. It belonged to no known family. This is akin to discovering a thick book in a foreign language that belongs to no language we know. If so, why is understanding these inscriptions so difficult? The problem is not just their age or the damage and degradation they have suffered, because a language is not merely a set of signs. To resolve a lost language, 3 essential elements are needed: a sufficient number of samples, contextual principles of the culture, and ideally, a bilingual text like the Rosetta Stone that played a role in deciphering ancient Egyptian. Without these, decipherment is largely guesswork. For centuries, that is exactly how it has been, until now. Because artificial intelligence is forcing all this to change. It does so not by taking away human expertise, but by seeing details that humans cannot. Scientists use advanced machines to feed these undeciphered texts into systems capable of analyzing recurrence from a relational perspective. These systems do not understand language the way humans do. AIs can distinguish mathematical and visual patterns that we overlook. They can cluster similar symbols, detect repeating sequences, and, based on position, predict which are likely verbs or nouns. One of these is called neural network modeling. In this method, the way the human brain processes information is mimicked. In practice, this method aims to train AI to recognize patterns by showing it hundreds of images or symbol sequences. Another method is to train algorithms to recognize repeating structures, thereby identifying punctuation-like marks or formations indicative of grammar. Additionally, there exists linguistic modeling that tries to decipher the workings of a language without knowing the meanings of words. This method tracks the spacing of symbols, their frequency of recurrence, and their order, just as we know in English that "the" generally comes before a noun. These methods have provided breakthrough insights into known languages, for example, revealing that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written not by one person, but by two different scribes. But now the same technology has begun to unravel writings left by lost civilizations. Yet there is a problem. Within these ancient symbols lie hair-raising contents, cycles of destruction, fires that return, silences before the storm.
There were reasons these texts were buried and hidden, and now they are beginning to speak again. The real issue is this: should we read and listen to these writings? There are scrolls that should never be opened. At the beginning of 2024, an event occurred that shook the academic world, though it made little noise beyond it. A parchment that had defied decipherment for 2,000 years was finally read. But it was not people who did it. It was an algorithm. What emerged was not the work of a lost school of philosophy. According to those who examined the text, the lines pointed to catastrophes, political silences, and a cycle of fire. What people didn't realize was this: this parchment, which had survived the destruction of a city, in fact contained warnings that no one was meant to know. Let us go back a little. The year is AD 79. Mount Vesuvius erupts with tremendous force and buries the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum under ash and debris.
Pompeii is the name everyone thinks of. With its plaster-cast bodies and petrified streets, it was wealthier than Herculaneum, which lay closer to the coast. More elegant, and it perished in a very different way. While Pompeii was covered in ash, pyroclastic surges struck Herculaneum, torrents of gas and rock above 500 degrees that devastated the city. It happened so suddenly, so quickly, that an entire library was preserved by charring. In other words, it turned to coal in an instant. Today we know this library as the Villa of the Papyri, and it belonged to a wealthy Roman, likely Julius Caesar's father-in-law. The library contained hundreds of scrolls, all transformed into thin black rolls. For centuries they lay untouched. Opening them by hand only caused them to crumble. Ink and papyrus had completely fused together and become indistinguishable. Researchers assumed the knowledge in these scrolls was lost forever. In the 1990s, infrared imaging allowed parts to be read, but to this day, no one had fully read an entire scroll. Enter the Vesuvius Challenge. In March 2023, a group of researchers and tech entrepreneurs, including former GitHub CEO Nat Friedman and University of Kentucky computer scientist Brent Seals, launched an international competition.
The goal? To virtually unroll and read these scrolls non-destructively using imaging and artificial intelligence.
The prize was substantial, over $1 million to anyone who could extract a real text from a sealed scroll. Why offer such a high reward? Because the task was nearly impossible. Scientists began with micro-CT scans. Imagine an extremely precise X-ray capable of producing thousands of tiny cross-section images. Then came the real challenge.
These scans had to be interpreted by AI systems trained to detect minute differences in density. In other words, the AI had to see the ink hidden within a parchment that looked like stone, ink that no human eye could perceive. The scans had to be interpreted by AIs trained to detect density variations. The system had to see the ink concealed within this stone-like scroll that the human eye could never detect. This was not mere computer vision. It was the machine resolving chemical traces inside carbonized material. And one day, in a quiet corner of the internet, a university student named Luke Farrader made history.
In October 2023, after nearly 2,000 years, he became the first person to read a word inside one of these scrolls. The word was porphyros, Greek for purple, a color associated with royalty, grandeur, and power. Reading just this one word earned him a $50,000 prize. But it was only the beginning. Soon 2 other researchers joined Fariter, Youssef Nader and Julian Schilliger. By early 2024, together they brought to light more than 2,000 Greek letters from this scroll, enough to determine expressions, context, and the author. The text was not a random poem or a forgotten shopping list. It was a philosophical work by Philodemus, a famed Epicurean thinker and student of Zeno of Sidon. Philodemus was no marginal figure. He was a dissident who stood against the religious and political order of the Roman world. The Epicureans held that the gods did not intervene in human life. They categorically rejected divine punishment, fate, and the steering of the populace through fear. For them, pleasure did not stem from revelry, but from the absence of pain. And that was the highest aim of life. They warned people against rulers and blindly accepted dogmas. Thus, when the scroll found its voice, it did not whisper. It entered the debate directly. And here is where things begin to get strange. According to those close to the Vesuvius challenge team, the text contained not only lines about personal virtue or philosophical attitude. Some passages spoke of a coming fire. Others pointed to periods of enforced silence, that is, times of deliberately imposed muteness. In this section, controversial even today, the phrase strategic silence was used to describe how rulers hold on to power during foreseen times of turmoil. Elsewhere, it spoke of a cycle of smoke and rebirth, and stressed how the minority must be prepared for that moment when the light will be extinguished and the cleansing will begin. Were these merely metaphors? Or were they covert signals of a real catastrophe in the past or the future? Remember, Philodemus lived several generations before the Vesuvius disaster. He was not writing after the eruption. This scroll was not a record of what happened. Most likely it was foretelling possible future events or warning people. The scientific response was cautious. Some say these lines are overinterpreted. They argue that ancient philosophers preferred to speak in symbols. They suggest fire may have indicated an inner affliction, that cleansing referred to a spiritual purification. But some experts are not warm to this view, because the text speaks not only of natural events, but also alludes to censorship, to the suppression of expression, to the control of knowledge. And today, thanks to this machine, that knowledge has reappeared. The critical point is this: artificial intelligence cannot distinguish mythology from reality. It cannot perceive metaphors. All it sees is a swarm of patterns. It detects structures, repetitions, and contextual cues. The real danger is not what is written in the text, but how we interpret it. If a phrase like, "the fire will return," emerges, how are we to interpret it in the context of political power and elites' oppression? Should we see it as a metaphor for debate, or accept it as a genuine warning sealed for centuries? Some think it is coincidence. Others argue it is only metaphor. But those who understand the language of power, silence, and fire call it prophecy, algorithms that perceive the unseen. So how does AI make these discoveries? How can it read a carbonized scrolls or decipher symbols from 5,000 years ago? The short answer: pattern recognition. But the real answer is far more complex and uncanny. AI does not read and extract meaning from sentences like humans do. It doesn't need to know the meaning of words or grasp the flow of a sentence. Instead, it examines relationships, which signs appear side by side, how often they recur, and where in a structure they occur. To do this, it employs 3 main approaches: language modeling, character separation, and symbol clustering. Language models are sometimes trained on massive datasets containing thousands of pages of text, images, and transcriptions. These models learn not the meaning of a word, but which word tends to come next. Think of it as a colossal autocomplete system. If the model sees that in countless contexts one symbol follows another, it begins to expect that sequence. If a specific part of a text is missing, AI predicts which symbol should come there. Character separation is a more visual process. When scientists scan old manuscripts, especially those worn down or overwritten, it is often difficult to separate letters.
Sometimes the ink has bled or the text has partially vanished. AI systems can be trained to segment the text. Thus, each letter is isolated from the background damage, digitally sharpened, and made available for closer analysis.
You can liken this to isolating a single voice in a noisy room and amplifying it until it becomes clear. Symbol clustering goes a step further. After separating symbols, AI classifies similar ones by shape, placement, and context. This method is crucial for undeciphered languages like the Indus script or Rongo-Rongo. If the system detects groups of symbols repeated in the same position within a line, or sequences used in similar inscriptions, it can propose that they represent names, verbs, numbers, or religious concepts. One of the most innovative tools in this field is known as protosnap. Developed by researchers working on cuneiform used by the Sumerians and Akkadians, protosnap allows matching characters of this script with their variants across different periods and regions. Cuneiform was not carved in stone, but written by pressing reed styluses into clay. Therefore, the resulting script varied greatly by scribe, region, and era. Protosnap matches all variations of the same character, eliminating visual chaos and enabling AI to perceive them as a single sign. It's like showing a child all the different forms of the letter A, handwritten, printed, ornate, and expecting them to recognize them all as the same letter. In addition, there is a system called HieroLM, developed to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs are not merely drawings. Each symbol can represent a sound, an idea, or sometimes an entire word. This feature makes hieroglyphs one of the most complex writing systems in history. HieroLM applies a modern translation logic akin to Google Translate to ancient languages. It learns which symbol sequences are likely to appear together, and when a hieroglyph is damaged or missing, it predicts the missing part based on grammar rules and frequency of use. It does not achieve perfect accuracy, but it yields results accurate enough to help us understand signs once unreadable. Another revolutionary advance comes from deep learning methods applied to palimpsests, manuscripts in which the original text was erased and overwritten. Often, this was no accident. At times, old religious texts, philosophical works, or scientific notes were deliberately erased by later scribes, either because they were deemed politically objectionable or because parchment was valuable, and replaced with new texts. Today, some of these hidden layers are resurfacing. One technique is reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI for short. This method involves photographing manuscripts from different angles under various lighting. The software can thus reveal microscopic traces and residues of erased ink. These traces reveal the ghostly contours of letters imperceptible to the naked eye. When combined with GANs, generative adversarial networks, AI can resurrect erased texts. GANs rely on the competition between two neural networks. One tries to generate the image of the lost text, the other detects errors. The process continues until the first network produces a result. The second can no longer distinguish from the real text. Thus, vanished texts reappear with eerie accuracy. In 2021, a research group used this method to bring to light previously unknown mathematical works of Archimedes, hidden beneath a 13th century prayer book. Yet texts revealed in palimpsests are not always harmless. Sometimes they contain warnings, dissenting writings, or records of catastrophes deliberately concealed. Why? Because some people did not want them remembered. This is precisely what concerns scientists. Because while AI offers unparalleled access to forgotten knowledge, it also brings to light texts that may have been deliberately concealed. Ancient rituals, forbidden teachings, explanations of cosmic cycles beyond symbols, or prophecies are now being carried into the digital world by machines that do not care what they find. Some of the texts revealed by these techniques are eerily reminiscent of our present: social collapse, moral decay, great fires, and imposed silences. Are we projecting our own fears onto these neutral texts? Perhaps so. But these are not isolated instances. These themes recur again and again across different civilizations, on separate continents, and in unrelated texts. So is this a coincidence or a discernible pattern?
And then the fundamental question arises: are we truly bringing knowledge to light, or are we breaking open secrets sealed thousands of years ago? Messages from ancient civilizations. Some of these ancient inscriptions may not have been made for us to read at all. They were carved, stamped, drawn, or incised by hands long forgotten. People who lived in cities long buried, in languages no one speaks anymore. And today, after millennia of silence, these messages are being read by machines. Not because we solved them, but because artificial intelligence has begun to notice a frightening truth: structure, purpose, intent. These signs were not random doodles. They were real languages, and only now are we beginning to understand what they meant to tell us.
Let's start with ancient China. There, people developed a special writing system to seek answers about the future.
Around 1300 BCE, during the Shang dynasty, oracle bones emerged. These bones rank among the oldest surviving examples of Chinese writing. They were neither letters nor stories. They consisted solely of questions. Priests would carve these writings onto turtle shells or ox scapulae, then heat them until they cracked, and interpret the resulting fissures as the gods' answers.
The questions were made permanent. They were inscribed directly onto the bone. What is chilling are the questions they asked. Will there be a plague this year? Will the stars be clear on the third day? Will the sacrificial ceremony be accepted? For centuries, these writings were painstakingly compared with modern Chinese and gradually deciphered using classical methods. But in 2024, Chinese scientists developed AI systems that matched the symbols used on oracle bones with their modern counterparts at extraordinary speed and accuracy. This system was trained on hundreds of thousands of digitized glyphs and used image recognition techniques to complete missing or damaged parts. The results showed repetitions in question types, the timing of rituals, and the way celestial events were recorded. Some questions seemed predictable, but others strikingly voiced modern concerns. Plague warnings, cycles of fire and famine, pleas for guidance in times of chaos. These bones were used not only to foresee the future, but also to shape it. When to offer a sacrifice, when to start a war, when to remain in silence. If you move west and forward about 1,000 years, you find yourself in the Maya civilization. Their cities rose in what is now southern Mexico and Central America. Around them stood giant pyramids surrounded by temples, palaces, and ball courts. The Maya's script, composed of complex glyphs, was among the most challenging systems humanity ever developed. Each glyph could represent a syllable, a word, or an entire idea. For centuries, these texts were unintelligible. They appeared as nothing more than tangled curves and overlapping forms. But in recent decades, discoveries about the Maya language, aided by AI, have greatly accelerated translation. Machine learning projects trained algorithms to decode glyphs and separate their components. For humans, the work progressed slowly. For AI, it was a matter of hours. So much so that some AI models can now recognize and extract glyphs at the pixel level, even on damaged monuments. The stories told by these writings were not limited to religion or royal lore. They spoke of sacrificial rites, droughts, betrayals, and collapses. The glyphs recorded the rise and fall of dynasties. They marked years-long famines, wars, and unusual celestial events. In many cities, the same phrase recurred: Great Drought. Researchers think this refers to prolonged aridity that may have played a role in the Maya collapse. But was this merely a natural disaster, or something else?
The texts speak of bloody rituals performed to balance the sky and appease the world. Were these just metaphors, or were the Maya recording and trying to prevent an event they could not understand? Then there is Nushu, a completely unique writing system, a language developed and used solely by women. In the mountain villages of Hunan in southern China, women were deprived of education for generations. In response, they created their own script for songs, letters, and even embroidery. This writing is composed of fluid, slanted strokes and carries an emotional expression. Nushu means women's script. It was passed from mother to daughter or sister to sister and was never taught in formal institutions. It was also kept from the eyes of society. For many years, researchers thought Nushu was merely decorative or a poetic tradition. But in 2025, an AI project at Dartmouth College set out to decipher and revive Nushu using deep learning techniques.
Researchers trained a model on only 35 paired examples, Nushu texts and their Chinese translations, to have it infer the structure and meaning of the language. The model achieved about 50% accuracy, an extraordinary advance for a writing system no AI had ever encountered before. The resulting content was not just simple poetic expressions. Heavier themes stood out: sorrow, loneliness, resistance, and warnings. Many texts spoke of a silent pain, unseen girls, and bitter winds that never tell the truth. A partially deciphered letter by AI spoke of a coming sorrow etched into moonlight. Scientists still debate whether these expressions are metaphors or based on real events, but taken together, something undeniable emerges. These were the voices of a concealed grief, and these voices had been hidden from the eyes of power. Spanning centuries and continents, these forgotten languages are finding voice again, but this time not through human memory, but through the logic of machines. I cannot see cultural context. It does not recognize shame, censorship, rituals, or traumas. All it sees is data. And when the same themes, plague, drought, silence, oppression, recur again and again in the writings of civilizations that never knew each other or communicated, one cannot help but ask, what were they all trying to tell us? But the real issue is not only what they wrote, it is how these languages disappeared. The Maya abandoned their magnificent cities. Oracle bones gave way to imperial bureaucracy. With modern education, Nushu survived only in whispers. Each time, a voice was silenced completely. But now, AI is bringing these voices back from underground, letter by letter, code by code. So what will happen when the entire message is finally deciphered? Will we still call it history? Or will it be something else entirely? Lost scripts and their causes. Some languages evolved over time, some survived, but many vanished suddenly. The disappearance did not always unfold over centuries. It sometimes happened almost overnight. Scripts vanished, alphabets scattered, and languages were erased. Only crumbs remained. Today we call them lost scripts, but that term suggests they vanished on their own. What if they did not? What if some were deliberately hidden? Even today, Latin is used in medicine and law. Chinese, with roots thousands of years old, can still be read in its modern form. So why did other writing systems, just as complex and advanced, disappear entirely? The answer is not as simple as time or disuse. In some places, these languages were deliberately overshadowed by others. Some were gradually absorbed, forgotten, or abandoned. But in some unsettling cases, the silence seems like a deliberate choice. The disappearance itself appears planned. And this raises a chilling question. Were these scripts erased because of what they said? Rongorongo is one of the most disturbing examples. Found on Easter Island in the 19th century, it consists of strange symbols carved onto wooden tablets. Some bear an unusual style where lines proceed alternately in reverse. When Europeans arrived on the island, the natives had already forgotten how to read these writings. There was neither a teacher who knew the language nor a living oral tradition that preserved its meaning. Consequently, there is not a single contemporary speaker. The culture that developed Rongorongo collapsed shortly after contact with Europeans. Disease, enslavement, and forced conversion destroyed a history that had lasted for centuries. Yet scholars have long suspected these glyphs were not merely decorative. Some believe they were secret genealogies or rituals. Another view is that the writings contained oral histories or warnings. A further theory proposes that Rongorongo was an encrypted prophecy produced when islanders realized their environment was being destroyed and their society was collapsing. That is precisely what makes it so unsettling. If they foresaw the approaching end,
Did they hide their knowledge in a way outsiders could not decipher? There is also Etruscan, spoken in central Italy before Rome's rise. The Etruscans were a sophisticated civilization that built cities, produced art, and sustained a deep religious tradition based on the afterlife, celestial forces, and prophecy. Thousands of inscriptions have been discovered on pottery, monuments, and jewelry, yet the bulk remains undeciphered.
We know the Etruscans had a wide and varied vocabulary. We can read and pronounce their alphabet, but grammar, verbal structure, and syntax remain an unresolved enigma. Why? The most common explanation is that as Rome expanded, Latin replaced Etruscan. But some scholars find this insufficient.
They point to religious texts and rites banned by Roman authorities. In particular, some Etruscan rituals associated with necromancy and prophecy were considered dangerous. The Roman state was generally tolerant of diverse faiths, but toward Etruscan beliefs and practices, it adopted a harsh stance. Did Rome destroy Etruscan wisdom because some of their writings were too disturbing to the regime, politically dangerous, or spiritually subversive? Some fragments allude to prophecies, celestial maps, and a cyclical concept of catastrophe. These could have clashed with Rome's imperial ideology. If Rome truly obliterated Etruscan knowledge, was it cultural assimilation or a direct purge? The Voynich manuscript takes this a step further. Found in the early 20th century in an Italian monastery, this book resisted all attempts at translation. Filled with a bizarre, cyclical script that fits no familiar language and illustrated with unintelligible plants, zodiac-like figures, and naked women depicted inside strange tubes, the manuscript defied sense. Whoever claimed to have solved it would soon see meaning fall apart again. Some researchers thought it a hoax. Others believed it to be the product of a lost language. But in 2018, a team working with AI claimed the text might actually be Hebrew with vowels removed, grammar reconfigured, and the whole encrypted. AI suggested some sections could translate to phrases like, "The head of the house gave advice to the priestess," or "A bath was prepared according to the plans." A stronger and more unsettling theory posits that the manuscript was a secret midwife's manual filled with information that should not fall into male authorities' hands. This could explain the cipher, the need for secrecy, and the strange images. But it would also imply this: the knowledge was deliberately hidden because its authors knew it would be seized. If true, the Voynich manuscript may be the most striking example of forbidden knowledge concealed in plain sight. History shows this happening again and again. When a new regime comes to power, it shapes language to its own ends. As a belief system spreads, it thrusts older symbols into the shadows. When a culture takes control, it decides both who will speak and who will be remembered. That is why we tend to think lost languages vanished on their own. But what if they were deliberately silenced? One answer is violence. The sword often outlasts the pen. The other possibility is fear. Fear of what is committed to writing. Fear of knowledge that might one day resurface. Fear of truths that once learned can never be unlearned. Because some secrets were never meant to reach us. This is precisely what worries both historians and today's AI experts. Because machines fear nothing. They recognize no moral boundaries. They do not pause at danger signs. All they do is keep reading. If they bring to light knowledge that someone tried to conceal, they do not question why it was hidden. The real issue is this: are we truly ready to learn what was kept secret? Or are we opening doors that should never be opened? And what if one of them reveals a truth we are not yet ready to hear? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.